evaluating a piece of media purely by metrics is not enough. Sometimes its value lies in the feelings it can invoke. So when it comes to the Soulsborne fandom, maybe if we see what they see and feel what they feel, we might be able to understand each other a little bit more. Some of the YouTubers I'm going to show you have put completely random and irrelevant footage on their videos. So what I'm going to do is use the audio of their videos, and instead of their footage I will be showing you some of the comments in their comment sections to show you that I'm not just nitpicking a few YouTubers here and there, and this is not just a small portion of the fandom, it's actually a huge one, and they all share the same problems, the same mindset.
I remember my life wasn't in the best place at the time. My grades had been slipping, I'd stopped working out, I was drinking a lot and eating a ton of crap I shouldn't have been eating. I was even being lazy at my job. Normally I'm a pretty driven person, but this was a low point for me. I was even slacking with my passions, the things I was working on the side.
Recently a news report came out about a certain boy that unfortunately took his own life because of school bullies. Now obviously this is an awful thing anyone has to go through, but it made me think of my own experience. Now, I don't have any children, but I've gone through some stuff in my life and I feel comfortable enough to talk about it, and I think when discussing mental health, I think it's something that you should talk about. And I guess one of the another reasons why I want to talk about this is because last weekend I kind of had a slip up. But we'll start from the beginning. Well, where all of the issues with my mental health began. When I was 8 years old, my dad was murdered. It kind of shocked everyone in my family, obviously, because that is a huge thing to happen, and I don't remember too much about it. I think I've suppressed most of those memories. But moving past that, 4 years later, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Now, if you don't know, type 1 diabetes is normally a genetic thing. But my dad was adopted and we didn't know his parents. So, we didn't know if it was genetic or not. And when we approached the doctors and asked, they found something that they have never found before. Basically, when my dad died, my body went into meltdown, into shock, and my organs stopped working. And that is why they think I have type 1 diabetes. So that's always a constant struggle. And diabetes is a very common thing to have. It's a lot more common than you would have thought. But moving forward into my teenage years, when I was 16, I had what me and my family call my meltdown. Now this is when something snapped in me, and all of a sudden I didn't want to smile, I didn't want to laugh. I wasn't a very nice person to be around. You know, I went a little bit batshit, to put it in layman's terms. So because I felt depressed all the time, I went to the doctors. And that was when I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Now this was a game changer for me, because I could put a label on why I felt the way I did, and I could start working at bettering myself. But there were times where it was dark and I didn't want to better myself. I had those silly thoughts. So the fact that I wanted to better myself, I think, is really important. You can be content with who you are and how you are dealing with life, and that is perfectly fine if you are happy and content with that, but I obviously was in a situation where I wasn't, so actively trying to get better and have a positive outlook on life was a real struggle for me, and I still struggle with it every day. I think the most important thing to remember is you're not the only one. There are billions of people in the world. Never feel isolated, because that's something I struggled with. I always felt like I was dealing with it on my own, and that's just simply not the case. The internet is a scary place, but there are people there who can help. I can't stress that enough though, you are not alone in this.
I was very depressed, and of the two brothers I have, Isaac had played Dark Souls, and he had suffered through it because it might be my favorite game ever made, but it is obscenely obtuse for someone to get into it that doesn't know anything about it. And Isaac had been trying to get me to play Dark Souls for probably a year, maybe over a year at that point, because, you know, like anyone else who's played it and actually persevered and gone through it, it kind of ruins them because they don't want to play anything else because it is that good or had a profound effect on them or whatever. And the first time I tried it, like a lot of other people, I immediately went to the graveyard and got my ass kicked by skeletons, and then I was like, yeah, fuck this game. And I didn't play it for probably a year until early 2015, which I guess is the point I'm trying to get to, is for whatever reason I decided to give it a second try, and because Isaac had already suffered through it and he knew all the, you know, really weird stuff like, oh, you need this ring to do this, or like you have to beat this wolf so that you can go in New Londo without being a ghost and all this stuff. He was basically my strategy guide, and he made it so that I could play through the game essentially on easy mode, which I'm not ashamed of, because if that's what it took to get me into the Soul series, I'm okay with that. But told me enough to get me started, and then I just went hog wild with the game. And it was, I remember when I made it back to Firelink Shrine after going through Undead Burg and before you fight the gargoyle dudes, and just hearing the Firelink Shrine music and like being like, oh, holy shit, like realizing where I was and where I had gone and like mapping out, you know, all of the locations in my head, realizing the map was fully connected. And I remember that was the moment that I was like, okay, there's something going on here. And then for the next month or couple weeks at least, the game just like consumed me because I was super depressed and I was working on music, but other than working and sleeping and hanging out with the few friends I had, and there's some girl stuff going on in there somewhere, all I basically thought about was playing Dark Souls, because I had kind of been getting burnt out. Like the only games I would really play were like Smash or Left 4 Dead with my brother, with my friends, and Dark Souls like rekindled that like holy shit feeling of playing a video game. Like nothing had made me feel as like completely immersed. It's, people use that word a lot, but it was a complete escape playing that game. Like, and I'm okay to admit it, that it was the thing I looked forward to was playing Dark Souls, which is, it's ironic that was the happy part of my life, because that game is dark, pun intended, and it's depressing, and it kicks your ass.
The game was described in almost every review as one of the most difficult games made in recent years, and many likened it to the often sadistic difficulty of many older games, whilst seemingly also forgetting that those older games, even on consoles, were still very much in the mindset of the arcade, where the goal was to extract as much money from gullible infants as possible. In any case, it is clear that many regard Dark Souls' legacy as one of unrelenting challenge and intimidation, of the macabre and the miserable, of death. Are they correct in asserting this view of the game? You could certainly make an argument for that case, but to do so I believe would be reductive. In fact, I would go as far as to say that Dark Souls is actually about as uncompromising a celebration of life as the medium of games has produced up to this point. Whoa, slow down there, Hamish. Where are you coming from with this? Well, this, albeit totally anecdotal argument, comes from a very personal place. In fact, it comes from my own experiences wallowing in what I imagine to be the endless sorrow of life and imagining my own ideas of death. That is to say, they come from my experiences with severe mental illness, specifically major depression, anxiety, and to a lesser extent OCD. For context, I have dealt with these issues for many years, and they have driven me to some incredibly dark places in my time, including multiple attempts on my own life. Depression robs you of your rationality, your personality, and your energy, and without those, your brain develops a pretty warped view of what it means to exist, and a fairly nihilistic approach to existence, as laughable as it may seem to some, is almost inevitable in cases like this.
Before 2022, I had never beaten a Souls game, but being a fan of YouTubers long before I was ever a YouTuber myself, I noticed a trend. How Dark Souls helped me cope with suicidal depression, how Dark Souls 2 saved my life, Sekiro saved my life, Dark Souls helps my mental health but I don't know why, how Bloodborne helped with my depression, Dark Souls saved me. Prior to ever beating one of these games myself, I saw a lot of lamenting about Souls games, controversy over the difficulty, whether there should be an easy mode, talk of them being masterpieces, lots of use of the phrase,
"Thank you, Dark Souls."
But the theme that constantly intrigued me the most was people who reported being genuinely changed for the better for having played it, even going as far as to say that it saved their life or helped lift them out of a depression. You know, we have the journeys of the world, the Life is Strange series, Grease, Before Your Eyes. When I picture games that change people's lives and deliver them to a better place mentally, I don't picture this. And you may not either. But if you find the right thread and the right back alley online, you'll uncover a shamelessly wholesome circle jerk of folks singing the praises of a Dark Souls or a Sekiro and how it taught them to fight back against their depression. Usually signing off on their story with the phrase, "Don't you dare go hollow." Corny as many admit that it appears, there is something very real here about overcoming the challenges in a Souls game and how it changes people. Never once has a FromSoft game been listed as a nominee for Games for Impact at the Game Awards, and yet, maybe they should be. Devils heal forests, and it would seem that Souls games heal souls. But this isn't just magic or some whimsical poetic sentiment that makes these games affect people in this way. It's a cute metaphor to do the whole devil's art of forests as Dark Souls is the mental health thing, but there is science to trophic cascades, and there must be science to what these games do to the human psyche.
Back in high school, I had a friend named Rob. One of my closest friends, Rob was in a constant battle with depression throughout his years in high school. While I didn't have to personally deal with depression, I was with him through a large part of his struggle, and I myself had to deal with chronic stress and anxiety. Depression, stress, and anxiety are all things that we've all had to deal with in one way or another. Whether it be helping a friend or family member through their darkest times, or whether we had to fight our own battles over and over, we've all faced it. We can all relate to it. It's no secret that Lordran, the land that Hidetaka Miyazaki's grim epic Dark Souls takes place in, is nothing if not dreary, hostile, and oppressive. This is a land filled to the brim with monsters and the cursed undead, who wander aimlessly after having lost their way, their drive, given up, and turned hollow. It's easy to just sit back and take Lordran at face value, easy to look at the game's hardships as purely the result of design choices, and easy to look at it as nothing more than a game. And while it is certainly true, I can't help but see more than that. To me, Dark Souls is more than just a game. It's an allegory for depression and the hardships of those who face it on a daily basis.
So the first thing we have seen is all these people were in a very low point in their lives, they were depressed and had other mental issues as well. So there is already some kind of bias. Like for example, if you are homeless and you are starving and you haven't eaten in many days and you are at the verge of death and someone comes and gives you a little bit of food, even if the food is not that good, for you, someone who is in that condition, it's going to taste way better because that's how much you need it. And the act of someone giving you food might look like an act of saving your life, even though it's something simple, something that doesn't cost much money or effort or time. The same thing goes if you are in a condition of being depressed, a state of despair where everything is completely pointless, a state with a total lack of happiness, where sadness is unbearable, where life feels like suffering and you want to harm yourself to stop the suffering. In that kind of state, where everything is darkness and misery, a tiny ray of light can shine brighter than anything. A tiny droplet of happiness can feel uplifting, life-changing, and make you appreciate it. A rational mind requires logical thinking. The heavier the emotions surrounding it, the harder it becomes to think logically. It's hard to put your personal feelings aside for a while and think in a broader way, outside of the box, when you really need those feelings that much, when you are desperate for them. But once again, this time, we are here to understand these feelings, so the objective metrics that are used to evaluate these games don't matter this time. Now let's see how these games are connected to the depressed people that found so much value playing them. Let's hear their explanation.
Rob once described his depression to me as fighting the same battle over and over again with less and less drive to do so. It's a constant cycle of facing the same enemy over and over again, only to lose some of yourself each time. In Dark Souls, specifically Lordran and the world around it, there lies something similar, though it manifests itself in a very different way. For an unknown reason, there was an epidemic among humans. An unknown but assumed large number of people were cursed, branded with something called the Dark Sign, and turned into the undead. Immortal, in a sense, these cursed undead are fated to roam the world for ages. Anytime one dies, they're brought back to life by the mysterious powers of the bonfires that are scattered around the world. As an undead loses their drive or their purpose or their goals, they begin to hollow. Much like many of those who face depression on a daily basis, they gradually lose themselves. To be hollow is, in essence, to have lost any real sight or recollection of who you are, and in a way, accepted your fate. A hollow is frequently found doing what it did in life. Soldiers will be soldiers, commoners will be commoners. For many, they simply sit around and stare at something, or they stay where they were when they lost themselves. Essentially just a shell of who they used to be. They have no purpose in what they do. They simply do it because it's the only thing they know, maybe even the only thing they remember.
So, just like depression makes you feel sad due to the lack of happiness, the lack of drive to do anything, after reaching a certain point, you no longer even feel sad anymore, because sadness and happiness are polar opposites. If you have only experienced one of those, the feeling becomes kind of neutralized. For example, if your life is full of happiness, you won't be feeling it on the same level every day, every time. It just becomes the norm. The same goes if your life is full of sadness, with no happiness at all. You become desensitized to it. You become numb to it. And what's left is the feeling of despair. And if your life is full of ups and downs, full of highs and lows, with lots of happiness and lots of sadness, then you can fully feel the impact of those. A hollow, by definition, is having a hole in your soul, being empty inside, to the point that you don't feel anything or want anything. You are just there. Much like depressed people in real life. They were once full of hopes and dreams and were working hard to get them. When they become depressed, they might continue their works just typically, not even because they want to keep themselves alive, but because it's the only thing they have been doing for such a long time, the only thing they are fully used to doing. And their body just keeps going purely on muscle memory, when their brain, their inside, is pretty much dead.
The player character is one of the undead, though their fate is vastly different than that of the mindless hollows. They are chosen and will face hardships and trials beyond that of any other undead in this lifetime. As with depression, the chosen undead will fight the same enemies over and over again, and each time the player gets revived at a bonfire without success, they grow more and more hollow.
The main character, though, is a little bit different. He is not completely hollow, but he is close. And he is chosen, which is why he is the main character, just like everyone is the main character of their own lives. So the character is struggling with so-called challenges, just like people struggle with their depression. And every time they fail, they get closer to becoming hollows. But every time they decide to push forward and achieve victories, they get closer to having their humanities restored.
There are two main ways that people handle depression and two main ways that people defeat Dark Souls. Some choose to go it alone, either trusting in their own strength or simply not wanting to be a bother to others. The rest will decide to call on the help of friends or strangers, gaining strength by having those friends or strangers by their side. Those who opt for facing the challenges solo will undoubtedly have a harder time without the support of a couple of friends. Depression is unforgiving. It's constantly pushing you, constantly throwing you to the dogs, and it does not hold back. It's vicious, uncaring, and apathetic all in one. At times, with both it and Dark Souls, it feels as if it wants you to break, wants you to give up. At those hardest times, the chosen undead makes a choice. They either accept defeat and give up, or they use the challenge as fuel for their fires. With both, despite how difficult things get, each battle can be won and each step forward can be made.
So I'm going to correct him a little bit here. There are two main ways of facing your challenges. One is alone, as an individual, and the other is being part of a collective. Obviously the second option is way easier, but it also has way more options. Like, technically everything is help, whether you summon a friend to actually help you inside the game, or if you are reading the signs that other players have put, or you are straight up using internet for help to interact with people and get some hints. All of that is help. Some of those options are obviously more helpful than others, and you can pretty much decide on how you want to experience your journey. Now obviously that doesn't connect that much to real life, because not everyone has those kinds of options, and real life is way harsher than a simple video game that constantly revives you without really any actual risks besides time consumption. In the real world, you might need money, you might need some decent clothes, you might need to be somewhat decent looking. Like, obviously, someone who has no parents, is homeless, can't find a job, looks extremely ugly, is very physically and mentally weak, will have way harder time finding any help than the rest. And the mistakes you make in real life and failures doesn't just cost you time, they can cause you permanent physical damage or make everyone around you hate you, meaning that finding help will become less and less likely, and some of your choices might even get you killed, and you won't just respawn after that. There are real, permanent consequences to your actions. You can't just treat real life like a video game, but you can definitely take some lessons from video games and apply them to real life.
Now, none of that is to say that Dark Souls is entirely relentless. If it were, nobody would play it. Instead, Dark Souls achieves a very precarious balance. For all the times it beats you up, it has something to encourage you. Usually it's the adrenaline from finally beating that boss or getting past those few enemies, but occasionally it's in the shape of non-player characters that always seem to have some words of encouragement. In this way, it differs immensely from Depression. Dark Souls flex the world with characters for you to meet, each with their own backstory and reason for being in Lordran. These characters and their stories are an almost constant presence throughout the game. The majority of them simply mind their own business and go about whatever it is they're doing, but a few of them actually encourage the player to press forward, serving as small bits of light in the dreary world of Lordran. In this way, Dark Souls provides the player with a support system akin to having a friend there to cheer you on. While you're not constantly around these characters, you see them every now and then, and 3 of them in particular are remarkably happy or cheerful, all things considered. As I've said before, not everyone has or chooses to have support in their fight against depression, but these characters all serve to be the same kind of support one would get from friends at your side. One character, Laurentius, genuinely cares for the chosen undead. After you save Laurentius from being trapped in the sewers, you find him at a shrine. He's always happy to see you, and he says something that's really stuck with me.
Goodbye then. Be safe, friend. Don't you dare go alone.
This may be the best line in Dark Souls, and it makes it clear that your fight, whether against the beasts of Lordran or against the beasts of depression, is not a fight that you need to have alone, and there's always some place or someone who truly wishes the best for you.
So, one of the main incentives to keep going, to keep pushing forward until you finish the game, is the adrenaline rush that you get from achieving the victories against the boss fights that require so much time to beat while they're constantly killing you. Obviously, that need for the adrenaline rush is coming from a very desperate place when it comes to the players that have depression. And of course, the second important feeling is the act of kindness. In a cruel world that reminds you your real life, you are desperate for some people to be kind towards you. And it's not just the few NPCs in the video game itself, it's the supportive community as well. Now let's see the positive and negative impacts the games had on them and hear it from their own mouth.
Dark Souls 2, people asked why I love that game so much, and I always come up with some bullshit answer like, oh, this was, you know, it had the better PvP and the better lore and stuff. But realistically, it was the first time in 20 years I was excited about something, and that was Dark Souls 2. I honestly didn't care if it was good or not. I was just happy I could feel excitement and joy again. I was hyped, basically. And when you are down in the dumps, getting excited about something is insanely difficult, and Dark Souls 2 managed to do that. So there's my answer. That's why I love Dark Souls 2, because it made me happy again.
Getting excited for a product is kind of normal, especially if it's a sequel to something you already love a lot. But again, if you are at a very low point in your life, you are pretty much desperate for that kind of excitement, for that kind of happiness. And if you really need it that much, you will pretty much lie to yourself and convince yourself that it's much better than what it's supposed to be. Even after playing the game and hearing from everyone about the game's flaws, if you are still lying to yourself just to keep yourself hyped, then it's pretty much mental masturbation. Lying to yourself is harmful. It has consequences, because you can't keep lying to yourself forever. At some point you snap out of it and you realize how stupid you were and how much time you wasted consuming bad media. And if you lie to others as well, while being pretentious and whistling around the point they made about it being bad, you will start feeling embarrassed and ashamed of yourself. You will have to digest the severe stupidity of your previous actions, the fact that you became a clown, and how hard it is for everyone now to take you seriously. You have lost your credibility, your respect. If your feelings are clouding your judgment, it means you need to become better at managing them, or you will keep suffering the same fate.
I died over and over to Udex Gundyr, and the only thing that kept me going was knowing I could play with my friends once I beat him. After about 30 tries, I finally managed to take him down, and I got the first rush of beating a tough boss in Dark Souls. Well, it wasn't a tough boss, it was Gundyr, but you know what I mean. I beat the game and loved the experience, but I still wasn't quite hooked. Sure, it was a great time, but I didn't have that instant addiction everyone else seemed to get. After a few weeks, I kept thinking about that game. I wondered if I could go back and beat all those bosses myself. Probably not, it's just too hard for me. I beat Dark Souls Remastered in 9 days. Never in my life had I felt such emotions from a game, a sense of wonder and dread, a sense of accomplishment. The difficulty is what makes the progression so rewarding. It probably seems obvious to us all now, but it wasn't at the time. It's only easy to see once you felt it for yourself, but I loved it. But this is only scratching the surface of how Dark Souls really changed my life. And speaking of my life, it was still not in the best place. It was almost summer vacation, and at this point, all I wanted to do was play Dark Souls. So during finals week of my sophomore year of college, I decided to try Dark Souls 2. Holy shit, talk about instant addiction. I've never been so obsessed with a video game off the bat like I was with Dark Souls 2. Nate even started this one with me, but I was so addicted I ended up breezing past him and getting way more ahead. In 3 days, I had 24 hours played during finals week. Turns out if Johnny Sins isn't your teacher, no amount of extra credit turns an F into an A in 3 days.
Alright, so once again the main reason of attraction to that game was the feeling, that adrenaline rush that comes from overcoming a so-called challenge, even though he admits it was just the tutorial boss. But still, if it makes you feel that way, you like it and you keep going. But here's the thing, as he clearly stated, it was an addiction. Being addicted to the feeling of accomplishment or any feeling is not really healthy. If you lack accomplishments in life, you obviously had the need to feel them way more than those who have some kinds of accomplishments. And if you find something that gives you that feeling, no matter how fake it is, no matter where you found it, and no matter what negative impact it has in your actual life, you are not supposed to let it take control over you. You are not supposed to be addicted. Sure, it's nice to have an idea of what it feels like, to grasp the feeling, to get a piece of it, but when you concentrate on that and forget about everything else that's going on in your life, not only are you neglecting your real issues, but you are investing all your time and energy into chasing something fake, something that will not have a positive impact in your life. And again, once you snap out of it and you realize that all your time and energy was thrown away just because you are desperate, the realization can be devastating. If you realize how many things you could have possibly done all this time instead. For example, people who play dating simulators can be kind of similar. Like, you can have a healthy relationship with a piece of media. You can use it for just some entertainment, to see what the emulation of dating high quality people might feel like, and how they manage to emulate all of that to a video game and have fun with all the different kinds of options and conversations going back and forth. But as long as you understand in your mind that it's all a video game, that's what it always meant to be, and you need to move on with your life while you are playing it, and at some point it's going to end. You are not supposed to make lasting relationships with an NPC, with an AI. They are just programs with nice visuals. They don't have a free will like you do, and you are supposed to use your own to lead the best life you can. Those who get addicted become depressed once the realization kicks in. It's kind of like drugs, where they are supposed to artificially make you feel things that are considered positive, like extra stimulation or massive relaxation, but in the long run, the effects are always devastating. If you are willing to invest your entirety of physical and mental energy for a long time on something, you better have something worthy to gain from it, or you will definitely feel deep regret for your life choices. So the results from being addicted to a game like Dark Souls can be pretty heavily negative. As the guy mentioned in his video, he failed his college exams. And of course, if you have nothing important or nothing you like going on in your life to the point that you actually hate your life, you want to find some kind of escapism.
In a time where I was super depressed and I didn't have any direction, and all my friends that I had were in college, and I was barely making any money, and as kind of stupid as it sounds, it made me feel like I had some sense of purpose of the second that I got sucked into the game. After I realized the map looped back to Firelink Shrine, I like knew that I had to beat the game. Like I knew that I had to see it through, and not just because it was like, oh, it's fun, or it's an escape, which it was both of those things too. It was very satisfying to beat the bosses, but it was like it was like my divine it was like my divine destiny to beat the game. Like it was just something I knew I had to do.
The entire divine plan and the reason and grand destiny and all that stuff is all in your head, like a story you are building up to convince yourself that whatever you are doing is really that important, when in reality you are just playing a simple video game. In desperate situations like being stranded on an island and living there alone for years, people will tell themselves tons of insane lies just to make their situation more bearable. Let's see how many more lies the Soulsborne fans are willing to tell themselves and why.
This is the feeling when you're getting the hang of something, when you've won a few rounds and feel comfortable with your strategy, when you're nervous to have a conversation with someone but then talking with them comes surprisingly natural, and when you start to get your first FromSoft game. It's the moment when you start to understand when it's best to roll versus when it's best to simply walk or run to avoid attacks. When you realize that you can't button mash, when you start comfortably landing parries, when you realize that patience is everything.
Patience is everything, he says, since that's pretty much what matters when it comes to games that are meant to be brute forced through trial and error. They don't require any intelligence or reflexes, any mental or physical skills. They just require time. You keep trying things to see what works and what doesn't. You memorize all the pieces of data, both your mistakes and the correct answers, and you finally use the correct answers to win. Patience is a virtue and a skill, but that's because it's used in something that already requires other skills as well. For example, when you are playing a stealth game like Metal Gear Solid, where being seen by the enemies means you are going to fight an entire organized army, you need to have patience and stay hidden and observe the enemies, what they are doing, all the places they are going, what kind of weapons they have, how close they are to each other, how much time they take to walk from one position to another. All that stuff is data that you process in your brain and then use to create tactics, strategies, to make long plans on how you are willing to deal with all of that. And sometimes when something didn't go as planned, you use your quick thinking to make a small change in your plans and make sure the grand plan can still work. When you are driving or reading chess strategies, you need patience to understand what is going on, how everything works, all the ways you can use all that stuff. You know that learning these things is going to take a lot of time, and you might want to do something more exciting or more enjoyable at that time, but you push that need away and you decide to be patient. You decide to increase and hone your patience so you can keep learning things that are useful in the long run, instead of embracing every little temporary joy that won't really help you. Sitting in a room your entire life, waiting for your death, is not patience. You didn't do anything. You just sat there and waited until it's all over. You threw all your time away. You threw your entire life away. There was nothing earned. There was nothing experienced. There was nothing learned. There was nothing really done. There are no accomplishments. That's not patience. That's being a moron, a brain-dead zombie. If someone made you an offer about you having to sit in a prison for a year, but once that year is over, they will throw a great birthday party with many people for you, and you accepted that, that doesn't make you patient. That makes you a moron. Even though there is some kind of reward once the year of waiting is over, at the end of the day, it's just a desperate feeling that you had because you are lonely, because you never felt your birthday celebrated. You are supposed to use that time to do better things with your life and yourself, so you can actually have some kind of value, to have real friends that will appreciate the day of your birth, or whatever day you decided to have some fun with them, instead of taking a deal out of pure desperation. Patience requires you to use its time wisely and skillfully to be considered a virtue. Pure time consumption is just not it. So stop trying to pass your laziness and unwillingness to do anything but sit there and take it as a virtue, because it's not. It's actually the opposite of that.
Several studies like this 2021 article have found that self-efficacy is negatively associated with a lot of things that I'm sure you're familiar with. Depression, anxiety, worry, even social avoidance. In essence, if you have a higher overall level of self-efficacy, you'll likely experience a lower amount of these other brutal thoughts and behaviors. The reverse is also true. Lower levels of self-efficacy are actually predictive of depression and the like. So as you find yourself getting better in these games, it provides a sense of competence and a chance for you to grasp that sensation of feeling sure of yourself once again.
So, self-efficacy is about how much confidence you have in your skills, and self-esteem is about how much you respect and value your own self. And of course, one can be tied to another. Obviously, the more confident you are at your own skills, the more you will also value your own self, your life. And you will be more confident to socialize with others as well, because you have something to show for. You have something you are good at. You don't have to feel like a useless nobody all the time. You have convinced yourself that you are worthy of something for sure. You are really good at something, and that something matters to many other people as well. You have a place in society. You can fit in this world. You are no longer an outsider. It makes sense. You no longer feel hated by this world. You no longer want to die. But of course, how you feel for yourself isn't always how things really are. People with inflated egos exist. One can convince themselves they are worthy of so much more while actually being pretty much useless. And while in their own little head they will feel good and confident at whatever they are doing, to everyone else they will look like total clowns. And at some point they will have to accept the truth, unless of course they shove themselves in a little bubble, in an echo chamber, where everyone around them keeps constantly lying to keep the illusion of worth, to keep the ego high and inflated.
Albert Bandura, the psychologist who originally proposed self-efficacy in 1997, posits that efficacy is developed from 4 sources: vicarious experience, verbal persuasion, affective states, and mastery experiences, that last one being the most prevalent source. Mastery experiences are exactly what they sound like, seeing for yourself that you have mastered something. Proving to yourself that you can spell red is a mastery experience, as is riding your bike with no training wheels or finally beating Ornstein and Smo. They are the most effective source because they provide real, tangible evidence that you can do it. Pep talks are nice, watching someone else do it is nice, but doing it yourself is proof that you've got this. Usually.
As I explained in my previous video, video games that are designed to be trial and error do not require skill by default. Knowing which of your keys opens your door is not a skill, and it cannot be mastered. Someone who doesn't know which of the keys opens the door is considered by the Soulsborne fans as someone whose skill level is at 0, and someone who knows which of the keys opens the door has immediately mastered the skill. Well, since there is no skill ceiling, by default there cannot be any skill. Even if a door requires multiple keys to open, someone who knows half of the keys has not half mastered the door, he just has half of the pieces of data needed to use. Just like a boss in the Souls-like games requires multiple pieces of data to be used to defeat it. If there is no skill that can be transferred to similar activities that require the same skill, then there is no skill that is being honed. Opening one door, or even 1,000 doors, doesn't mean you became a skilled door opener. The next door you find will be just as troublesome to open as the first one was. An example of a skill that allows you to open doors would be lockpicking. The more you hone it, the better of a door opener you become. Mastering a Souls game essentially means understanding the very basics of your character's moves. So the skill level is not exactly 0, but it's so low and shallow that it might as well be. If you put an idiot and a genius to compete against each other in a Souls-like, you won't be able to see any of the genius person's talents thrive because they are not needed anywhere. Surely the genius will still win because of better memory, better eyesight, and because he managed to master the basic combat a couple of seconds earlier, but you won't really see much of a difference between them. Just like if you take a monkey and an idiot and put them in the typewriter waiting for one of them to write Shakespeare, the idiot is still going to be way faster because at least the idiot understands what words are, so he won't have to completely randomly mash the keys. He will be using entire words instead and somewhat of a correct grammar. But at the end of the day, both the idiot and the monkey are incapable of actually writing a masterful piece of poetry or literature with their actual skills. They are just brute forcing it. One has better understanding of the very core basics of the language, and that makes him somewhat faster.
The only way mastery experience actually helps build our efficacy is if we can confidently attribute what we've done to our own skill and not some other factor like a lack of task difficulty or luck. And I think this is what separates Miyazaki's works from the pack. Most games in my experience are built to be beat. They are constructed to keep you engaged in a flow state such that you are constantly receiving a fair challenge, right?
So in his experience with video games, which doesn't seem to be much from what he's saying, he thinks most of the video games are meant to be beaten. No, they are all designed to be beaten by default. There is a minimal amount of playtesting done to make sure at least the games can be beaten so they can be released. The only games that cannot be beaten are some of the glitchy ones like playing Battletoads on multiplayer. Fair challenge means good challenge. The challenge can be really low or really high, but a fair one is definitely what makes it good, even when it's insanely high. As long as you understand that once you improve your skills, this will not only be beatable, but it will be an insanely exciting battle. There is nothing wrong with making extremely high challenges for your game. The things that make a battle feel unfair are usually a huge amount of luck that is stacked against you, or a game that makes you do something extremely tedious to the point that there is no fun anymore. Of course, fun is subjective, so there might be people who are fine with doing the exact same thing over and over again for days to no end. But obviously, for people who value their lives and their time, that kind of activity would be not fun, not fair, and a pointless, cheap way to create the illusion of difficulty.
As you beat enemies in turn-based RPGs, you gain experience, and with enough grinding, winning is less dependent on your own decision-making and more a factor of how overleveled you are. Quick-time events can hardly be called a challenge, but they do look and feel nice.
So, in turn-based RPGs, you can grind and overpower mindlessly enemies. And guess what? You can pretty much do that in all kinds of RPGs, or even games with RPG elements that allow you to grind. That doesn't mean you are supposed to beat them like that. It's just an extra option for those who are willing to take it slow and steady and be more confident for their victories based on the time they have put into strengthening their characters. You can decide to skip most enemies and speedrun the games as long as you have proper strategies and quick thinking to adapt in whatever happens during the combat. Also, he showed Kingdom Hearts 2, and instead of talking about its action combat and how good the defensive options along with the platforming is, he only talked about the quick time events, as if that resembles action games in any way, or any video games really. That was a completely pointless thing to say.
Roguelikes like Inscription and Hades become easier as the game passes because you'll consistently find power-ups that will stick with you in your next run, meaning you'll never truly start from scratch again. If you keep struggling, the game will keep accommodating. Mario Kart rewards you with better items if you're doing worse, and some games like Resi 4 and Max Payne actually change the difficulty of enemies if you aren't playing well in an attempt to keep you feeling like a badass. And this is not a critique, by the way. Games are built to craft an experience, and if you're struggling more than the devs want, it can tarnish the intended message.
Roguelikes, along with the rest of the skill-based games, can all be beaten in your first try as long as what they demand is skill and your skill is high. Do you know what games cannot be beaten in your first try by your skills alone? Games that don't require skill. Trial and error games.
I think you and I would agree that a victory in most games can be attributed to either our own skill or just as easily attributed to the game being built as an interactive tour that's designed to be beaten.
If a game is designed to be an interactive tour, then it's just a game that is easy. A game that has difficulty modes, anywhere from interactive tour to having a full mastery of it, is a game that includes people of all kinds of different skills and allow them to have different kinds of experiences. But obviously, the game with difficulty modes needs to be balanced around all of that. Inflating the enemy health and damage doesn't make a good difficulty. It makes the same exact experience just more tedious, more punishing because you will die to anything, and more time consuming since you will be doing the exact same things over and over again to kill the enemies. If you want to know what good difficulty looks like, then take a look at Metal Gear Solid 2, where the difficulty changes the enemy AI, visuals, hearing, the way they are checking the entire room and working together.
Can I really feel like I've accomplished a feat if I beat Final Fantasy VII Remake?
You can absolutely feel like you have accomplished a feat if you beat Final Fantasy VII Remake, if you are really that desperate to feel it and you have never accomplished anything remotely close to that. Hell, I would even say that completing the game 100% can be decently challenging. The game is not a total cakewalk.
Can I flex on people that I got past Bylosite and Skyward Sword? I think for some people, video games, though fun, are generally patronizing with their difficulty, and any victory in them can be easily attributed to the game setting you up for success and not your own merits. Again, not a bad thing per se, but very much the norm, I feel.
Again, the difficulty depends on what kind of game you are playing and on what mode. But about the flexing part, if you feel the need to flex on others, then your problem is not just lacking a reason to brag about a difficult game to play or having accomplishments. You have deep-rooted issues and you might need therapy. Even if the best real-time strategy players in the world were bragging all the time to everyone they meet, it would still make them obnoxious little losers, because everyone would become aware that they are one-trick ponies and they want everyone to focus on their one trick, and everyone needs to pretend how cool that trick is to constantly give them validation. Constant validation from others will never fill the void in your soul. You cannot restore your humanity no matter how much validation you get. You will still remain a hollow.
Souls games, however, are quite different. There is no in-game reward for failure here. There are upgradable equipment and levels, but easily the biggest determining factor is your performance. There is no luck, there are no reverse feedback loops or pity items, there are no dynamic difficulty adjustments, there is no easy mode.
Alright, so the bullshit meter and pretentiousness is off the charts. Not only are there pity items and tons of builds that can make you easily cheese the entire game, and bugs and glitches even, many which you can find easily by yourself, since the games are insanely broken. Most of the time you just decide to not use them because you want to feel even the illusion of the so-called combat. But saying there is no luck in a literal trial and error game is by far the dumbest thing you can say. The entire premise of a trial and error game is try something out, like some kind of gear, or try to guess when the enemy is going to attack and press the dodge roll button without knowing that it's going to actually work. And when it doesn't, you just try it with different timing. You just choose other pieces of gear that might or might not work without really knowing. All of that is random, therefore fully luck based. You can even beat the hardest boss in the game purely by luck. If every single one of your wild guesses of their attacks was perfectly timed with the dodge roll button, not because you know the timing, but purely because you guessed it, then your luck carried your entire way to victory. Or if you only learned how to dodge very few of the boss attacks, and in a specific fight the boss decided to only use these attacks, it means you got lucky. The enemy AI acted in a way that was completely favorable towards you. That's pure luck. It's sad to see that people who have been playing the same genre pretty much their whole lives, made an entire career out of it, still don't understand the gameplay of the games they have been playing.
If most games are built to be beaten, FromSoft games are built to make you quit. Your Zeldas, your Arkhams, your Tsushimas, they all provide an adventure, but these games provide a provocation. They insist that they can't be bested, and they dare you to try and prove them wrong. Every enemy is a threat. There is no ego fodder here. Damage is never neglectable, nothing is ever certain, and this series will embarrass you just as early and often as some others will coddle you.
The people who are quitting these games because of the so-called difficulty are just as stupid as the ones who convince themselves they are worthy because they beat a so-called difficult game. They are the same breed of moron that took two different approaches. Both of them lack the understanding of the gameplay. The kind of provocation these games are using is the same kind of someone telling you you can't drink from the toilet because I bet it's too much of a challenge to you. If you actually take that challenge and go drink from the toilet to prove them wrong, you are the bigger moron because you were successfully manipulated into doing something really stupid. Those who would refuse or quit that kind of challenge are not the ones that lacked the skills, but the ones that had the brains to actually make the choice that is best for them instead of the choice that will give them validation. But of course those who drank from the toilet will have a very hard time coming in terms with the fact that not only should they not feel proud of themselves, but actually feel ashamed of themselves for being such easy targets of some douchebag who gave them the so-called challenge.
Sometimes bosses are every nightmare you've ever had, minced, sauteed, and served to you in disgusting steaming heaps, and other times they are every bit as ferocious as they are regal. The terrain is often breathtaking both in its semblance and in its treachery. There is a boss in Bloodborne literally called amygdala, which is the part of your brain that processes fear and aggression.
The bosses are only visually threatening, but since the games have beaten to you the fact that they will be played the exact same way, there is nothing really to fear there. Just like always, you have to learn when to time the attacks with the invincibility frame button. And also the terrain could really use better coloring.
And because of all this, if you've ever beaten one of these games, you'll know that it wasn't because you deserved it, it's because you damn well earned it. There is absolutely no way to flunk your way through Souls games, and because of this, there is no way to have an external attribution for them. These games demand that you take it fully upon yourself to win, so any victory afforded to you will be seen with an internal locus. And since you know that you were the one that made this happen and not the game, since you took that dare, proved to the game and yourself that you could do it, and rose to the occasion, your self-efficacy rose right along with you. which, if we are to believe the study from earlier, should have a direct psychological effect on some of those darker thoughts. By climbing out of the pit that FromSoft games throw you in, you are provided with first-hand evidence that you can in fact overcome those demons, and you can do it on your own merit.
Alright, yeah. The amount of pretentiousness made me cringe really hard, but I will try not to be mean in this video, because I'm trying to understand them here. So, for you to convince yourself that you managed all that and you accomplished an incredible feat, clearly you first needed to convince yourself that these games are really hard and skill demanding, which is not the case at all. So you fail to understand the process of going from point A to point B, from the beginning of the game to the end, what exactly it is and how it works. You made a false assumption and then you proceeded to make another false one, not about the process, but about how great the feat of reaching point B is. So in this case, your self-efficacy is clearly increased based on a false assumption, making you delusional. Thankfully, I'm here to snap you out of it. Unless your life really depends on it to exist, then you will obviously have to keep the lie going as much as possible so you can exist as well.
If you feel like there's something wrong, making that first initial step to actively try and better yourself is such a great achievement.
I don't know, it gave me some sort of sense of control in my life that I somehow went from sucking ass, fighting the skeletons at the beginning on accident, and beating the game.
The way to live a happy life becomes clear. Take the little steps to gain as much agency over your life as possible.
It's certainly important to note a few things, like in the 2021 article from earlier, self-efficacy is only negatively correlated with depression, anxiety, worry, and social avoidance. It doesn't mean that raising self-efficacy is guaranteed to fix those things. The relationship goes both ways. Correlation isn't causation.
Exactly. Correlation isn't causation. Just because you are beating a game that makes you feel miserable and constantly punishes you and has horrific looking creatures and needs lots of time and many people call it hard and give up and rage all the time, doesn't mean you are beating a hard game. It doesn't mean you are accomplishing a feat. If you are consistently beating a hard boss, it doesn't mean you are good at the game or you understand everything the boss does. It could be because you got lucky or some kind of glitch is happening or whatever. If you are unable to understand the process, like to actually analyze it, how and why everything works throughout the entirety from point A to point B, then you just don't have the intelligence to understand it. You weren't born with a brain that can process complicated problems. That's why smart people can actually understand, and people with low intelligence have to believe. Low intelligence people need to make up theories in their minds to process complicated matters, but at the end of the day, they just don't really know. They cannot really reach to the truth. They weren't meant to do that. They weren't born for that. There is a major difference between embracing dogma and understanding objectively how reality works and why.
You could certainly see where repeated failure leads to low efficacy and in turn depression, but you could also imagine that the death of a loved one creates a depression that leads to the person feeling helpless. We can say with confidence that both factors are related in an inverse manner, but while it may help, beating Bloodborne won't necessarily bring you out of that dark place. These games aren't for everyone, and even if it is for you, it may not be everything you need. But I think the reason this series does change so many people is because in a lot of cases, that boost to self-efficacy has a very real, palpable effect on anxiety and the like. I'm stressed about dealing with people at work and my heavy course load at school, but after beating Artorias, after beating the Demon of Hatred, after finally getting past Margit, maybe it's not too much for me to handle. Of course, self-efficacy in Souls games is not the same thing as self-efficacy in life, right?
That's right. Self-efficacy, which is a feeling anyway, from a video game is not self-efficacy in life, because there are completely different skills in both cases. The confidence boost might give you the push to try something new and start from scratch until you learn a new life skill. Might be a thing, but confidence alone is not enough to learn skills. It's the requirement you need to at least try them.
This does not translate to being a good conversationalist or even a good person. Well, yeah, winning here won't fix your problems, but the efficacy from it may be more generalizable than you think. One study found that self-efficacy training in a sample of women increased self-efficacy perceptions not only for self-defense skills, but also across a handful of things like sports competencies and coping skills.
No shit, Sherlock. Women who were trained in self-defense, which is a physical activity that develops your muscles, had the confidence to try sports that require physical skills, since they are also physical activities. That's not exclusive to women, and it's not something you needed a study for. That's one of the most obvious things ever. It's like you guys live your lives in a prison with no mental or physical activities at all. When I was in elementary school, when it came to playing soccer with my class or my friends, I was usually playing in the position of defense or goalkeeper, because there were other children with way better dribbling skills, control and aim than me. They were into soccer and they were playing football all day, every day. Our formation made sense. No one had to tell us which of us should take what position. We figured it all out by ourselves, because it's really that obvious. And when it came to fights, I was usually the one that needs to head into them first, since I was the martial artist and the stronger guy. Those were all well expected, obvious things. And of course, since physical activities release stress and toxins, make you healthier, more well-shaped, they also help you cope better, because you realize it's not actually that bad. In fact, you can even get rid of the copium if you work on yourself to a certain point, as long as you have the potential needed.
But what I love about these games, and really any game that's brutally difficult, is that they are every bit as harsh as reality sometimes. Much like your real-life circumstances, they don't care about you or your feelings. They are what they are, unmoving, unwavering, unyielding. And even so, you still face them head on.
Good hard games actually do care about you and your feelings. They were made with certain consideration, to respect the player, to make them feel what the artist wanted them to feel. The Souls games, on the other hand, feel like they were just shot from the ass of the creators, with the basic formula of making the invincibility frames of the dodge rolls faster than the enemy attack intervals, which automatically makes the game beatable without any testing even needed. They are full of junk, terrible balancing, worthless items, incomplete story, just tons of flaws all over everywhere, and they don't just feel like the games themselves don't care about you, it feels like the creators themselves don't care about the games. Like everything feels so lazily done, so half-assed. It just happened that you are the ones that interpret it in a certain way because of your own specific circumstances, which might not even have to do much with the creator's intentions. People are making up stuff about the lore of these games all the time. What makes you think that the stuff they say about the reasoning behind the developer's intentions are any different? It's not like they can actually read minds or anything.
The small things in Dark Souls include learning the mechanics of combat, learning when to dodge, when to parry, how to manage your stamina and inventory. These are all fairly small elements when taken on their own, and they each get learned and honed separately as the requirements in combat become clearer to the player. But when added together, they become an incredibly deep combat system that make the player feel like a master of the systems in a way that no other game allows the player to feel.
You didn't tell us how the combat is deep, you only said it makes the player feel like a master, unlike any other game makes you feel. This is entirely based on your feelings. You didn't really make any argument. You didn't explain anything. The feeling of accomplishing a massive feat only exists because of the feeling that the game was so difficult while it was constantly punishing you. It's all a chain reaction of illusions. If literally the only thing that encourages you to keep going is the feeling of celebration and achievement, then you pretty much admit the game is a total 0 out of 10 if you are incapable of feeling that, which again required you to be in a certain condition to begin with. You pretty much admit that this game was literally made for depressed people, for those who have nothing going on in their lives, who have no standards and are really desperate to chase after a feeling, no matter how many hours they are willing to throw to get it.
Compare this to how I was viewing my life at the time. My idea of where I wanted to be compared to where I was seemed like this incredible gulf, and this arguably contributed a great deal to my feelings of hopelessness and worthlessness because I thought nothing could change. It was too big to change. By focusing on the tiniest things, like forcing myself to get showered and dressed when I wake up, or finishing that piece of music that I was writing but was going to give up on, or cooking myself a healthy meal, or lifting weights, or working on this damn show, whilst I'm still very much in the early stages of getting to where I want to be in life, breaking it all down and focusing on one element at a time allows me to progress in my life, no matter how glacial that progress might seem at times. Dark Souls taught me that it was okay for that progress to be slow. Working to achieve that progress is enough to keep going with it. What initially seemed like an utter brick wall of difficulty in Dark Souls, I was able to chip away at gradually until I became actually pretty good at it. What's more is that I trained myself to become good at it. The world of the game didn't help me do it. It couldn't care less about me. The design of the game, however, subtly encourages you to keep going with it, so you can feel the celebratory feeling when you overcome an obstacle. Taking this approach and applying it to my life allowed me to realise that even if I didn't have a concrete goal in mind, as long as I was working to make sure that I could see the joy of life, then that was good enough. And there is joy in life, both in Dark Souls and subsequently I discovered in the real world. One might think of the joy of Dark Souls being as simple as mastering each combat encounter, as this is arguably the core gameplay mechanic. Sure enough, the mastery of the combat system is the payoff for training yourself to become better at the smaller systems that make up the larger whole, and as a result every combat encounter and victory feels more substantial because it's all truly earned by the player. But for me there was a much more simple source of joy that I found within Dark Souls: the views. That may sound silly, but the stunning world design and the vistas in Dark Souls encouraged me to keep going even when the difficulty felt insurmountable. Even when the design is at its most grim, such as in Blighttown or Sen's Fortress, there is a level of detail and architectural consistency to the design of these places that they take on a warped beauty of their own, and as such exploring them is just as rewarding as any other area of the game to me. Why do I mention this? Because it actually encouraged me to go outside and explore the world around me in real life. For the longest time, my depression had rendered me a recluse, which led me to feeling incredibly isolated and alone, whilst also viewing everything outside my curtained bedroom window as a threat. Dark Souls reminded me that I actually am fortunate enough to live in a fairly pretty place myself in Western Scotland, and the joy I had of discovering new places and simply taking in the atmosphere and staring into the distance of Dark Souls vistas encouraged me to get out of my self-imposed prison and experience it for myself. It took a long time to get to that point, but as Dark Souls also taught me, as long as you are teaching yourself and training yourself in little steps, no matter how glacial the progress might seem, it will eventually yield rewards for you. You just need to know where to look for them.
Yeah, alright, so it's cool that Dark Souls taught you to do all those little things, like getting out of your bed, showering, cleaning your room, going outside, but those are things that normal people have always been doing. Those don't mean anything to them. And even then, you were still fortunate enough to live in a great place, and you were also fortunate enough to have parents, a functioning family that allows you to stay like a shut-in all day long, play your video game and do nothing. Do you think the people who are forced to work because no one is willing to take care of them would feel the same way? Since they have been already forced to work by something else, like their starvation, they can essentially be thankful to that. Or maybe they won't even get depressed because they never had the time to get there, because your job keeps your mind busy for like half of the day. Your issues sound very specific. Someone else would not have the time or the money to buy the game and stay home and play it every day until they know how to beat every single boss without getting hit.
Director Hidetaka Miyazaki has stated that the main concept behind the death system is trial and error. The difficulty is high, but always achievable. Everyone can achieve without all that much technique. All you need to do is learn from your deaths how to overcome the difficulties. Overcoming challenges by learning something from a game is a very rewarding feeling, and that's what I wanted to prioritize in Dark Souls and Demon Souls.
So based on Miyazaki himself, and you even quote him on your own video, he said that these games don't really require technique. Isn't that a direct contradiction to you telling previously that you are mastering these games? Like, do you guys not understand what trial and error means? Miyazaki is misusing the word difficulty and challenge, and even then he still admits the entire point was the feeling that you get after beating them. He essentially made a game that fools depressed people into believing they are accomplished, and of course in a world where depression runs rampant, his terrible idea of gameplay managed to succeed greatly, because mechanically it's trash. It's just meant to invoke a certain feeling from people with certain conditions.
This started something completely new in my life. A new way of carrying myself and viewing obstacles. I could quit because it's too hard, or I could push through it and get that reward of doing something difficult. I noticed myself eating better, working out more, drinking less, being more willing to take on challenges at my job. Everything Dark Souls taught me without realizing. But it really goes a lot further than this. After I played the first 3 Dark Souls games, I went on to play Bloodborne and Sekiro, but I had the same problem when I got to Sekiro. It's too hard, it's just too hard. But then I realized all the other Dark Souls games had DLCs too, so I went back and played all those, and I managed to beat everything besides Midir. He's impossible, I can't beat this guy, look at his health. I probably tried him 3 times before I gave up. I still didn't get it. Fast forward a year or two, I decided to give Sekiro another try. This time I did my research to see what I was doing wrong the first time, and finally the combat clicked. Sekiro instantly became my favorite FromSoft game, and I raved it to all my friends non-stop for the weeks following. Then the PS5 comes out. I finally get to play Demon Souls. This was during the finals week of my junior year, but this time I kind of had my shit together and managed to get some decent grades while still playing an absurd amount. And I loved every second of it. Then all I had to do was wait for Elden Ring, the perfect game. But I realized one thing. My job wasn't done. I still hadn't beat Midir, and I was terrified to. I was convinced he was impossible, even though at this point I had tackled all the hardest bosses in the series. Ishin, Orphan of Cause, Fume Knight, but for some reason, Midir still felt out of reach. But I knew I had to beat him to finish everything. I work up the courage to boot the game up, and what do you know? I beat him in 2 tries. 2 tries. I'd given up before I even tried. I built up this narrative in my head that I couldn't do it just because I tried it once and couldn't beat it. And that applied to my life perfectly. My whole life I've tried to pursue things of high interest like script writing or YouTube, and people always told me it wasn't possible, or they tried it and it doesn't work. Don't waste your time.
So in a game that is trial and error, and you are meant to die and keep dying and learning new information after every death, you decided to quit an endgame boss fight after 3 tries, even though you have played pretty much the entire franchise and you know exactly how every boss fight works. I'm sorry, but your IQ is really low. If after all this time you have devoted yourself to these games, you still don't understand what the hell you are doing. And it's not just your IQ that is low, but you are also a quitter. Your willpower is straight up pathetic. Pretty much non-existent. 3 tries and you were out in a video game that you love. And you even said before that you are usually a very driven person when you were talking about your job. Can you really blame me now if I'm going to assume that you were actually lazy at your job, or if I even have a hard time believing that you even had a job? And it's not just you, your friends are losers as well. You were surrounded by people that were actively discouraging you and were also failures themselves.
I mean, if you fought Midir 20 times a day for 6 months, don't you think you would be able to beat him by then? Not only would you beat him, you would demolish him. You would master all of his moves and beat him without even thinking about it. So why don't those same rules apply to life? They do.
No, they don't, because life is not about brute forcing things through trial and error. There are actual skills you are supposed to learn and hone them and use them wisely, not just to solve your own problems but help other people as well. Then there is also talent, which is required to even allow you to acquire some skills. Do you really think everyone can understand advanced maths, physics and chemistry? Do you really think anyone can become a master of any job and they just choose not to? I'm not trying to discourage you or anything. On the contrary, I want to encourage you to try so you can see how wrong you are. The Soulsborne fandom is also well known for its wholesomeness and kindness, but let's see how real it actually is.
And because of the online, you can even learn something from somebody else's death. I'd say that was the main concept behind the online too. The online is another key element of how this game helped me deal with my depression. It helped me realise that I'm not alone. Depression can lead to people feeling more isolated than they ever have done in the past, and this can be one of the main reasons the illness feels so insurmountable. The idea that the world around you is out to get you and that you are alone in this struggle is utterly demoralising. However, once you realise that far more people suffer from this illness than many people think, even if their circumstances and the way the illness affects them differ completely to how they might affect you, just knowing that they're ultimately fighting the same battle can be enough to convince someone that the battle is indeed winnable. Its design, mechanics and writing are all geared to encourage the player to keep fighting through, even when it seems insurmountable, and guides the player as to how they should break down a problem and solve it bit by bit. In fact, the game actively trivialises death. At least on your first time through, you are going to die far more than you are going to succeed, to an almost comical degree. Death becomes inevitable, expected, rote, but not in a way that forces the player to resign themselves to that fact. As I say, through working on those small elements, you can create your own agency. Hopefully I've made it clear how the close ties between Dark Souls world and the real world reflect and resonate in some pretty interesting ways, for me at least. Like I say, this is purely anecdotal. The science is largely still out on specifically how games affect pre-existing depression, so don't take this as me saying playing Dark Souls will cure you of your depression.
Okay, so he at least admits that his experience is purely personal. Others might have very similar experience as him, but they obviously also had very similar conditions as well. Like having the support of your parents, playing the same video game, living in a decently pretty place, having some real chances to progress with your life. But his main point was that you are not alone.
Overcoming difficulty builds confidence, it builds perseverance, it builds your self-efficacy, it gives you proof that you can overcome whatever the universe has placed in front of you, and knowing that others have overcome the same challenges you have, both in these games and in the real world, can remind us that we are not alone in our struggle. You are not the first or the last to fight the good fights.
And along my journey of playing all the Souls games for the first time, I started to notice something even more special about the Souls series, the community, which is another reason I made this channel. Back in my Dark Souls 3 days, I didn't even notice most of the summons were actually real people just willing to help me with a boss. That concept was unheard of for me. I had never encountered a community online that was actually willing to help each other, much less in gaming. The entire entertainment industry, most industries really, are built around connections, and the reason they help you is because someone once helped them, and in turn you help someone else when your time comes. The idea of paying it forward and allowing the cycle to continue is so beautiful because you don't have to do it, but you want to since someone else did it for you. No one's gonna scoff at you or punish you for saying no to a coffee meeting, but you know in your gut that it's the right thing to do. Someone helped you, so now you want to pay that forward. People can tell you what the right things are to do all day long, but the Souls games are the only thing that made me truly realize I can do anything, and I have the power to take my life wherever I want, because it made me conquer all these hurdles without even realizing I was doing it. It's only after that you realize what you accomplished. And if this didn't hit you directly while playing the games, hopefully my story helps. If you put enough time and effort into something, you will get good. It's unreasonable to think otherwise. Just like we all did with the Nameless King or Artorias or Millennia. Nate still hasn't beat Millennia either, by the way. Just get good, kid.
Whoa there, dude. What the hell happened here? After going on and on about kindness and helping each other, you immediately told us about your friend who hasn't beaten Millennia yet, and instead of fighting her together or giving him any advice or just helping him in any way, you told him to just get good. What happened to all the empathy and kindness you were literally just preaching about? Apparently, you were only preaching about it because you want and expect it to come towards you. But when you see someone else in need, your immediate reaction is to look down on them. Because when you have a shattered ego and you feel like you are at the very bottom of humanity, besides the desperate need for the feeling of accomplishment, there is also a desperate need for feeling superior to others. And when you don't really have anything great to show, you just try to put down others who are lacking one of your so-called accomplishments. That's not empathetic or kind kind in any way. That's purely egotistical. You care about your feelings, about how you want to feel, about what you need, and you don't care if you get what you want at the expense of others. You guys preach about how supportive of each other you are, and that you are not alone and all. But what have you really done as a collective? You are just playing and beating the same games over and over again and jerking each other off. That's not support. That's just throwing pity parties. You just stroke each other's egos constantly so you can keep doing the exact same thing. There really isn't any progress in that. It's kind of like ugly chicks with social media who have huge groups of friends and they constantly need to like each other's posts and tell each other how beautiful they are, just to cope with the fact that they look like shit. No one wants to date them, and the fact that they are not even aware of their ugliness makes them even more obnoxious. They live in a tiny bubble full of lies.
There was just no part of me that thought I had wasted any time playing Dark Souls like maybe I had playing other video games of just being mindless distractions from what I had going on or whatever. But Dark Souls, it felt like a religious experience that was like, oh man, if something like that can exist in this world, like this is a world I want to live in, which it took a virtual thing to make me appreciate my real life a lot more and be inspired and whatever. But this random or seemingly random to me fantasy game that my brother just kept telling me to play ended up being like the best video game I think I've ever played, and set me on whatever course I am now of wanting every game to be Dark Souls.
This right here is cult mentality. You are part of a community because you are desperate for the feeling of validation, and instead of trying to understand other people, you want to actually force them or shame them to understand you, to feel like you, to become identical to you. You want the world to cater towards you and your feelings, and for that to happen, you want to increase the number of your community members, and you don't care if that happens by forcing or shaming the others. Every cult is psychotic, and their members believe they are living life the right way or the best kind of way, and everyone else has it worse or is just wrong. The cult leader provides the validation to the broken minds of the cult members, and the exploitation of the members can go anywhere from simple monetary gain to straight up terrible crimes. If the main reason you love and you are addicted to these games is the chemistry they provide to your brain that gives you the illusion of happiness, of accomplishment, of camaraderie, of progress, then can you actually call it real? Drug users have a similar relationship with the drugs. If you are using a substance to chemically delude your brain into thinking you are great or you can forget your problems, is the product, the drug, really good for you? And just like drugs, video games can also harm your physical and mental health, depending on how much you are abusing them. And just like video games, some drugs can give you the push you need to finally get your life together, to finally start living and actually accomplishing things. But aren't you supposed to stop taking the drugs once you finally got your shit together? If you still need them and you still keep taking them, then you clearly haven't really moved past the point of relying on them. If you still need to play the exact same Souls games to convince yourself that you can manage things, that you can accomplish things, then you clearly haven't convinced yourself. Then you clearly still need the feeling of accomplishment because you are not really accomplishing anything. Another thing is, people are not smart enough to divide the trigger and the result. For example, if you really did fix your life because Dark Souls inspired you or pushed you, then in this case, Dark Souls is the trigger that pushed you, and the result is that your life was finally fixed. The result in this case is obviously good, but does that mean you really need to be indebted to Dark Souls and its creator for the rest of your life and act as if they are your Lord and Savior? Let me give you a very clear example where the trigger is really bad but the result is good. Let's say you are lying in your bed, depressed, and you want nothing to do with life, you just want to die. You have a dad. Your dad is an alcoholic. He is addicted and he doesn't want to see you rotting there. Instead, he sees you as a tool, as someone who should be bringing him money. So he decides to beat the shit out of you, to emotionally manipulate you into thinking that he is the reason you had the amount of happiness in your life. He is the reason that you are able to sit there and do nothing. And he would say that he loves you, but actually lying, because he just wants to force you to get out there, do something productive and bring him money so he can keep buying alcohol, so he can keep entertaining his addiction. So let's say in this case that you actually did, since he forced you to, and you found a job and you kind of fixed your life. You no longer want to die because you have something going on, as little as it is. In this case, the result is obviously good, because your life really did get fixed. But what about the trigger? Your dad keeps asking you more and more money to keep drinking more and more alcohol. He will keep lying to you, gaslighting you about the amounts of drinking he has, about how much you still owe him, about how much he loves you, and every now and then he will throw a little bit of an appreciation party with your own money and spend that entire day pretending to care about you and pretending to love you. Your dad in that case is obviously a worthless piece of shit who doesn't deserve a single second of your time and a single penny. But if the lies of him pretending to care about you, of him pretending to love you, are good enough for you and you convince yourself that all the gaslighting and the abuse is worth it, because every now and then that feeling of him loving you is what matters the most, then you are a moron and you are severely mentally ill. You have Stockholm syndrome. You are in love with your very own abuser. The abuser can even stop pretending to love you or care about you altogether, and you can still keep going just for the memory of when he did pretend to love you, expecting it to somehow come back again, when in reality it was just an illusion and you can't snap out of it. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I fully know whether the Souls games are really helping you or not, or whether you should appreciate them or just focus on moving forward in your lives. You should decide that for yourselves. It's your lives, your choices. If you decide to live a lie out of desperation, at the end you will have nothing but regrets.